Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and along with my co hosts, we love to review films, either current or classic, on this show, all with a lovable bear twist. This week, we are reviewing the remake of West Side Story by Steven Spielberg, directing here, the Sondheim musical. So, we got a lot to talk about. We're also celebrating episode 420 of the Movie Bears podcast with a fun special mini review. More on that here in a second. But we got a big show. We're going to need two other folks to help us break down all this goodness. Jim Pugliafico is with us in the virtual studio. Sweetheart, love of my life, how are you?
I'm great. I'm here. I'm here to support this wonderful review we're going to do. Um, Excited to talk about this one. Excited to get to our 420th episode. So this is going to be good. And I'm also doubly excited because we didn't do a show last week. So now we're back and I'm ready to go.
Yes, indeed. We took last week off. Will was traveling for work. We had some other stuff going on. It's good to be back in the saddle. Speaking of Will, welcome back, Mr. Lindis. How are you?
Hey, first of all, it's good to be back. I was off in the mountains doing mountain things. By that, I mean I was in Colorado doing things in an office at work. But I'm glad to be here tonight, so we can review this movie tonight. I think this one's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Both of the things we're going to be talking about, to be honest.
Yeah, we've definitely got some fun coming up for you. We're going to have a great discussion, I think, on West Side Story. But we've been kind of dancing around a little bit this little surprise we have for you folks on our 420th episode of the Movie Bears podcast. Guys, is it our 9-year anniversary?
Yep.
Yeah, 9 years is coming up next week.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Oh,
but
yeah.
we're celebrating 420 on the Movie
Number
Bears podcast.
Number nine.
Indeed. But we're gonna, before we get to our West Side Story review, we're celebrating episode 420 of the Movie Bears podcast with a thematically appropriate mini review of a little movie from the 1930s called Reefer Madness. Yes, it is entirely on brand, on point. Jim's making faces from the movie if you happen to be watching the live stream. But we thought it would be fun to talk about this crazy little film from the 1930s, all about the dangers of the devil's plant. So, Jim, Will, are you guys ready for our mini review of Reefer Madness to celebrate 420 on MBP?
Sure.
Let's roll it and smoke it.
All right, here we go. Episode 420 plays it. Reefer Madness. All right, Will, for anyone who is not familiar with Reefer Madness, give us a little bit of a brief setup of this crazy film.
Okay, so Reefer Madness was this movie that came out in 1936, originally called Tell All Your Children. It was a propaganda film that was put out to tell everyone why drugs, specifically marijuana, is incredibly bad for you. It follows this overly melodramatic story. First of all, this principal is telling the story about how this could happen in your neighborhood. As we find out this drug pusher sort of like starts getting like all of these ambiguously aged young people hooked on the devil's lettuce. And as they descend into madness with each puff of their little marijuana cigarettes, they hit and run people. There's manslaughter, suicide. There's other pretty bad things, and hallucinations, madness, just all sorts of things that are very obviously not associated
Directly
with marijuana
connected.
use.
Yes,
Directly
that's right.
connected. Yes, we are the Puritanical Bears podcast, and so this movie has had a bit of a legacy, right? Because at the time, it was very obviously a very biased propaganda film that twisted the facts to be what it is. It had a bit of a second life in the 70s as marijuana use became a lot more part of the counterculture movement, and people started seeing it as almost like a satirical cult classic, even though it was not originally intended as such. This movie is bad. This movie's really bad, but in like a really entertaining way. Leonard Maltin, I believe, called it like the first worst movie or something along those lines. And I think that's a very good description. Watching this movie feels like what you'd experience watching something like The Room or what was it, like Troll 2 or one of those movies like that that's known for being bad. You can still have a lot of fun watching this. So yeah, Reefer Madness is a pretty rough one. You can find it on Canopy. It's on Canopy. If you have access to local public library, you should have a Canopy account. Otherwise,
it's also on Paramount Plus.
Paramount Plus, really? Paramount Plus. I know
Paramount Plus.
You can rent it on Amazon too. So there's a lot of different places you can find this one. It's also in the public domain, so I didn't look, but it's probably on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, probably. So Will says this is a bad movie. Jim, would you agree that this is just abjectly bad, or what's your take?
Yeah, it's bad when you go into it kind of looking forward to seeing what this thing's all about. Because at one point I had seen clips from it or stuff like that previously, but this is the first time I've actually sat down to watch Reefer Madness, or I think the previous title was Tell Your Children. It's bad when you're like halfway through it. When you're halfway through a movie that's barely over 1 hour long, it's like an hour and 6 minutes, and you're checking your watch, or you're checking the time scroll, and you about halfway through it, and you find out you're only halfway through it, and you're like, oh my God, we got more of this to go. It's pretty bad. I mean, the thing is, even though it became kind of like a cult hit, I think probably to watch when you are high. Now, I've never watched this when I was high. I wasn't high in the 70s, but I can totally see a bunch of people getting around, like hammered out of their minds and putting this thing on and having a bit of a laugh. Although I got to be honest, some of this stuff was really dark. There was some really dark stuff in this movie, right? There's like Will said, a couple of people get killed right there in front of you. Somebody's on trial for something that they didn't do, and they're convicted, and they're almost getting ready to be executed, I think, in the movie. It's a pretty dark script, all to kind of scare everybody at the time away from drugs, right? Drugs are bad. Marijuana is the worst. At one point in the movie, they're comparing that drug to heroin, cocaine, other heavy drugs, and they say marijuana is the worst. It's not a gateway drug like some might consider it now, but it's actually worse than cocaine, heroin, and other quote unquote heavier drugs. So it's a pretty fucked up little movie. It's worth watching to me as a time capsule. I remember this movie was made only 8 years, I think, after the first talkie, the first movie with spoken dialogue that was recorded came out, and it is old. It's a little rough in spots. The audio and picture quality is as you can imagine is pretty rough, but not as rough as some of the over the top acting and script plot things. So it's something. I'm like I said, I was glad it was only an hour and 6 minutes long. We did get through it. We did have some laughs during it, which was good. Some audible guffaws from this movie. So yeah, I can say that I'm glad that I saw it.
Yeah, I'm glad that I saw this too. I'd actually never seen it before. I think the Riff Tracks guys did a version of this years ago, and I meant to catch up with it then because I love those guys. They put out some really funny shit, but I just never got around to it. And so when we were like, all right, let's watch this for the podcast, I was like, well, should we watch the Riff Tracks version or the regular version? I wanted to be pristine and pure for you guys, so I didn't want to be influenced by the Riff Traxers. Figured we'd just watch it for what it is. It actually took me back to my old school days, where they'd like pull out the projector and like play an old film on health, related topics. The human sexual reproduction system, like those old crazy films, where they would like talk to you about, whatever the topic was. And that's how this one starts out, right? Like the principal is like telling the community like how bad this is. And right. And I was like, man, is that going to be what this whole movie is? Is just this guy talking? Thankfully, about 6 minutes after his monologue is going and going and going, there's just this sudden cut. It's super weird, but it suddenly cuts to like actual film, like actual things going on, not just him lecturing everybody. And boy, is this thing a period of its time piece, because the misogyny on display in this movie was incredible. Holy crap. The way that men talk to women, I could not believe it. It was crazy. And then, of course, just all the draconian messages about pot. I mean, let me just say this. I was very, very straight edge on this stuff until, I don't know, probably 8 years ago. I didn't even drink very much. I mean, I was just, I don't know, very straight edge about it. But then I learned to calm the fuck down, that it wasn't that big of a deal. You know what I mean? And it's not what everybody kind of makes it out to be. The most evil thing in the whole universe. And so to see this film, it just reminded me a lot of like some of the messages that I heard in school growing up about marijuana. And not that I think high schoolers should be like sitting around toking it up and getting high. I don't know that that's the best thing to do if they're still developing brains, but
it's not our message. That's not our message. Do not misconstrue our message.
I'm just saying for me personally, adults make choices, and choices are fine. But I don't think that the messages of this particular movie ring true. I don't know how many people are committing homicides when they're high on pot. Is there data on that? I'm very curious.
There is, and it's like, nothing. Like,
the science we know today, and I mean, who listens to science anyway? But like the science we know today would refute almost everything that was said about marijuana in this movie, right? Back then. So that's kind of interesting in itself.
There's a few things that make this like a worthwhile thing to recognize and to talk about, outside of the fact that, it's fun as hell to watch this movie with these people just absolutely going bonkers on something that does not literally do the things that they say it does in the movie. These performances are over the top. These actions are over the top. It's wild. And I watched it most recently by myself. It'd be more fun to watch with people, of course, but there is other social significance, right? Like I mentioned, like it originally had it was originally a propaganda piece. And if you follow that through line through, and of course, this is a very transparent propaganda piece that's been proven wrong by a lot of things. It makes you re-examine a lot of the other propaganda pieces that we've seen through the course of the years in terms of war on drugs and other different things that have that social element to them. A lot of things have very much like a bias and a skew that impacts the way the audience receive it. It's also super compelling because I mentioned like that it was it became like this satirical cult classic in the 70s. The other thing this movie did that was really interesting is, I want to say it was like in the 40s or 50s or so, people were passing this movie around like that wanted to see sort of like exploitation style films where they got to see like, murders and stuff like that. And it was something that could be passed around because it was educational. So you could pass around this film and be like, oh, I'm not watching this really violent thing. I'm just watching like, something that's teaching me what drugs not to do. So this movie has had a life cycle. It's even mentioned Thomas in the chat mentions he mentions the musical that was done for Showtime starring Christian Campbell, who I love from Trick. Anna Gasteyer is in that, Neve Campbell is in that. It's playing up the camp elements, right? Like it really plays up just how much fun this story is when you take a peel back away from like the propaganda elements and just look at it for like what the final product actually is.
I kind of have to look that up now and see if I can find that one, because that sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Brad, you mentioned like it kind of brought back memories of like being in school and then bringing in like a film, like an educational film to watch in front of the class. When you and I are kind of a generation apart. So when you were watching this, did they bring in like a TV and a VCR? Is that what they brought in?
No,
or was it an actual film projector with the reels? Because that's
it was an actual film projector. I mean, let me just say, I went to school in a very small farm town. I mean, we had all of 200 kids in my school. I don't think technology was at the top of their budget. So I mean, we had old projectors like from the 50s.
Nice.
And a screen. You got to load the reels sometimes because I was special.
I really think part of my love of movies comes from that, like being in school. Like those were special days, right?
Oh.
When you got to not have to do writing and math problems and tests and quizzes and stuff, and you got to the lights go down in the classroom. They would pull the shades down, and some lucky kid got to run the projector, right? I always wanted to be, and I was always fascinated with that. It was like a magical time in school. And even before that, I don't know if you guys remember film strips. We had these things called film strips, which were just like, it was a strip of film, but they were still images that would get projected out of this still projector. And there was also a tape player, like a cassette tape.
Yep.
And that would go along with the film strip. And it would, one of the images would come up and it would have some voiceover, and then it would be like a beep, a beep, and advance to the next thing. I always wanted to run the film strip machine too. And I'm dating myself here probably, but
no, Brad.
But yeah, this definitely had that like health class.
Yeah.
This is what you should do. Instructional video. Feel to it, at least at the beginning, until it got into the narrative. Or even today, right? We have the same thing in work. We get these vignettes, right, of like these ethics vignettes of like what to do, and Jane emailed these company drawings to another friend in another company, and blah 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 blah.
Pause
it's the same exact
to discuss what you think Jane should do.
Exactly.
I mean, I loved those film strips. Ours was always so I will say that with like our generational difference, like we had like one of those and it was sort of being phased out. So I remember having it when I was like earlier in school, but it became more little projector. And then at that point, like the little VCR AV rack. But the one that was always done on the film strip with the kind of like the click audio track was there was this telling of A Wrinkle in Time that I remember they would always play for us. And it was like stills, like little drawings someone had done, and with a little audio going, stuff like that, like the projector Phantom Toll booth, and of course those good attendance days in middle school where they'd like put a Disney VHS in and everyone would sit around and eat their one slice of pizza. Dude, I love that stuff. So I'm right there with you, Jim. None of that has anything to do with Reefer Madness.
No.
Although I don't want to necessarily discuss who does what, but if I were the type of person who would be kind of okay from time to time imbibing the subject of this film,
no judgment here.
Watching like a fucking click track of Wrinkle in Time or watching Disney's Aladdin on VHS sounds like that'd be a pretty choice way to spend an evening. So I'm not saying that's coming up in my near future, but it probably is coming up in my near future.
And don't forget the pizza, because you're going to be hungry.
Hey, we watch this
give me
film
pizza.
now. We watch this film now, and I mentioned before, it gives us a few laughs and like gives us but in terms of historical perspective, how effective do you think this film may have been back in those times, like of scaring people to the effects of that drug? at the time. I have to believe that, it probably did skew people in that way before, because I mean, what else did they have to go by? If you think back, like what else was there to tell them otherwise, other than maybe personal experience? But like for somebody that like hadn't maybe tried the drug, I could see this film being effective in keeping them from doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I don't have
propaganda works.
I don't have hard data on that, but I mean, I can tell you, we didn't watch Reefer Madness in school when I was growing up, but I mean, we did watch like, anti-drug like PSA
Dare.
things, and I was the top dare student in my school. I was on board the bandwagon,
Yep.
like propaganda worked on me, and I think when I went to college and then I became an adult and entered the wide world, and some of those things that I picked up from propaganda, I started to realize was brainwashing and not at all true. But I wouldn't doubt it, especially back then when they didn't have the internet. When people weren't as worldly as they are now. I'm sure it worked for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would think so.
Wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, we grew up in a generation where Michelangelo and the Smurfs and Garfield all teamed up to tell us why drugs were bad on Saturday morning cartoons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a big crossover event, one of the first crossover events I remember in my life. Now it's pretty passé, but I remember when all the Saturday morning cartoons got together and did like a here's what'll happen if you do drugs PSA. And yeah, as a kid you buy into that because these are the characters you trust. And again, I'm not here saying like, yeah, all drugs are good. Go out and do drugs, everyone, right now. But I do think that the message is incredibly slanted.
Yeah.
And I think that it also creates a culture where, nowadays we've done more to what's the right word for it? Instead of thinking about like the social situations that lead to addiction and providing clean, easy off ramps for people that are victims of addiction, instead we look at it as a vice and we punish these people socially and morally. And I think a lot of that stems back to all of this propaganda that gets sort of like recycled through the decades.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely true. Well, happy episode 420 of the Movie Bears podcast. There it is, our mini review of Reefer Madness. I don't know when or if I'll ever revisit this film, but I'm kind of glad I saw it.
Yeah, like I said, probably one of those holes in our in our cultural education about reefer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So fill your holes, everybody.
Fill your holes with propaganda.
Wait, what? What? Hold on. Did I miss the message at this one?
I think you did. Well,
I'll be right back. I'm gonna go fill my holes with some Reefer Madness.
Oh goodness. All right. Well, fellas, the main event for this week's episode is really our review of Steven Spielberg's version of West Side Story. What do you guys say? Are you ready to sing and dance and laugh and click, snap, get into some gang-related altercations?
Yeah, we're totally snapping on rhythm with each other right now.
Yeah, it's not
God,
at
this
all
is audio hell. Audio hell. Apologies to everyone.
Oh man, this is going to be fun.
Oh, I can't wait. All right. So just to set this up for everybody, normally when we talk about a film, we talk about it spoiler free for 10 or 15 minutes. And then we kind of rip that Band-Aid off. We're actually going to jump right into spoilers for West Side Story. It's basically Romeo and Juliet, which has been around for hundreds of years. West Side Story, the original film, has been around for decades and decades. This is a remake of that film, so didn't really see a whole lot of point in separating spoilers from non-spoilers here. But if you do value your innocence, maybe you've never seen West Side Story before, this is going to be your first outing, you don't want to be spoiled, we completely understand if you need to step away. Please take care of you, whatever's best for you. We support. But we're going to go ahead and get this thing rocking and rolling. Here we go. Our discussion of West Side Story. All right. So, Jim, obviously, West Side Story has been around for a very long time. I don't know that this needs a big, huge, giant setup, but give us just the brief setup here for West Side Story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a new version of West Side Story. This is the musical that was written by the music for which was written by Stephen Sondheim, with lyrics by written by Leonard Cohen. No, I'm sorry, Leonard Bernstein, with lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, who sadly we lost just a couple of weeks ago, I think. So this was, in terms of like understanding, or for folks who don't know, I don't know how you could not know a lot about Stephen Sondheim, but this was the lyrics that he wrote for the 1957 stage play of the musical West Side Story. I think was his Broadway debut, if I'm not mistaken. And somebody can look that up and correct me if I'm not right, but I think it was his first Broadway works in terms of lyrics. But then we had the movie in 1961 that brought us Natalie Wood as Maria, and Richard Beymer as Tony, Rita Moreno as Anita in that movie. And that was back in 1961. So a good 60 years. Is it almost? It's exactly 60 years, isn't it? What is it? Yes, 60 years. Exactly 60 years ago. And now we have Steven Spielberg giving us his version of the movie West Side Story, or his adaptation, whatever we want to call it. This one stars Ansel Elgort as Tony. We have Rachel Ziegler as Maria, Ariana DeBose as Anita, and Rita Moreno is in this movie again, but not as Anita. She plays Valentina in kind of a new role. One of the new wrinkles, very few new wrinkles were added by Steven Spielberg to this movie. Very few. I'm sure sharp people will pick up a lot of it, but probably the biggest one was the addition of this character, and I think it's wonderful how it was folded into the story. We love Rita Moreno. I loved her character here. I thought it didn't smack to me as just stunt casting. Oh, I'm going to bring somebody back from the previous movie and put him in here. I thought the character really added some gravitas to what was going on in the story, and that's really good. Mostly names though in this, other than Ansel Elgort and Rita Moreno and Corey Stoll, who I recognized as one of the police lieutenants in this movie. A lot of new faces, new names. I thought the cast in this was great. We could talk about the lead, probably the male lead, a little bit maybe later on, but I thought the cast in general was pretty great, and I thought the film itself was fantastic as well. My first exposure to West Side Story was when I was growing up in the 60s. My uncle, who was he was about 10 years older than me, so he was like a teenager when I was in very formative preteen years, and a lot of my musical love of music came from listening to albums that he had been collecting. One of the albums he had was the soundtrack from the original West Side Story, and the West Side Story movie, which he would play, and then I would play like over and over and over. So I loved the music, number one, and that's what drew me in. Finally saw the movie, and then of course was excited for this movie. But I loved it. I thought, here's what I think about this film. To me, it comes across as Steven Spielberg. It was like a labor of love for Steven Spielberg, I believe. I don't think this movie was made by Steven Spielberg to necessarily do anything but satisfy his desire to have a go at a movie that he loved. Probably formed his his love of movies as well, from 1961, and a movie he probably revered growing up and becoming a filmmaker himself. It came across to me as a labor of love. We're going to talk a little bit, probably more about the box office for this movie and its performance and the whys and their wherefores. But that's what I see this movie as. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I'm so glad I got to see it on a big screen, because after this weekend, that's not going to happen, unfortunately. And we'll talk about the reasons for that. Yeah, I loved it. I don't have really a negative thing to say about this film. I thought it was really well done, as best, as good of an adaptation, or readaptation, or remake, whatever you want to call it, as I've seen put on screen ever. So yeah, I'm good.
All
I
right.
loved it.
Awesome. So we've got a really big love from Jim. Well, how about for you?
Interestingly enough, I was really hesitant going into this one, right? It feels like, on paper, it feels unnecessary. And what I mean by that is we already have like this pretty damn solid version, whether it be, a version that, I personally appreciate, or one that you can appreciate from the fact that it was like nominated for like 11 Oscars, like when it came out, like
didn't it win Best Picture?
Yeah, it won Best Picture, and like it won 10 of its 11 nominations. So like it did very well for itself. I mean, granted, there are movies that win Best Picture that are not any good, but at the same time, it's still like it's had a lasting imprint on popular culture, and on all of us. And I'll also add it to the fact that as much as I love Steven Spielberg as a filmmaker, I don't know that I've really been super in love with a lot of his movies over the last several years. Like it's like you can watch them and go like, okay, Spielberg makes good movies, but I don't know that he's chosen good films. So those types of things together sort of like, we're like, yeah, I'll go see it. Trailer looks fine. And I was very pleasantly surprised. Expectations blown out of the water. I'll throw a couple of hot takes in there. First of which being, I think this is Spielberg's best work since the 90s. Like, yeah. I think there's maybe been a couple others in there that I think have been good and entertaining and have their own things to say. Don't get me wrong, but I think that this adaptation is as good a musical adaptation as you can expect to see on screen, especially given, this is a year where we just got done watching Dear Evan Hansen and got to see sort of the flip side of that exact same coin. No shade against Dear Evan, lots of shade against Dear Evan Hansen. There's a lot of things to appreciate here, though. This movie, I think there's something about movie musicals, film adaptations of musicals, where they're afraid to be musicals, right? Like there's this adage on when you're watching a musical, like, when the emotions get too big to speak, that's when you sing. When the emotions get too big to sing, that's when you dance. And on a stage production, you get to sort of like live in this ethereal realm where people can sort of like bounce between those types of things. And we as the audience are allowed to just sort of like be a part of that journey. A lot of film adaptations try to play it really straight. Yeah, they're singing. Again, I go back to Dear Evan Hansen. Yeah, they're singing, but they tried to keep it as grounded as possible, and they lose some of what they're going for. Here, the dancing is fantastic. Like when they're doing the choreography for their dancing, especially the cool, the gunfight scene, I guess we'll call it, is really well choreographed. The songs all feel like they're there for a reason. All of the singers do a pretty darn good job. The cast, we got to see one of the nice things in the adaptation here is that in the 61 version, Rita Moreno was the only Puerto Rican lead in that, for a show that is about, basically half
white versus Puerto Rican,
half Puerto Rican. Yeah. And here we have a cast that looks the way the story dictates. We have Rachel Ziegler, who is a sort of a newcomer, all things considered. This was, I believe, her first role as Maria, and I think she was incredibly compelling. Ariana DeBose as Anita absolutely stole the show, as did Mike Faist as Griff. Oh my gosh, those two. Iris Minnis shows up in a reimagined version of Anybody's, which was cool. Love seeing Brian Darcy James. He didn't have a lot to do as Officer Krupke, but he's one of those guys who kind of classes up the joint whenever he's in a musical. And also there's Ansel Elgort, who is perfectly fine in this. He is perfectly fine in this. There's other issues with him, but that sort of goes outside of maybe the review itself. This is good. Like, I honestly think that, like, this might be sort of like my new go-to in terms of, or my gold standard in terms of, like, when I think about what a staged screen adaptation that isn't just like a pro shot like Hamilton or Come From Away was. This is what I think of as, like, this I think could be my mark on the wall. I want to see more adaptations that have the passion and the craft and the just willingness to go there to let the singer sing in Spanish without having to subtitle it, that West Side Story did. So yeah, this is an easy layup for me. It's, you know, not my favorite film of the year, but I mean, it's, you know, I do that top 25 video at the end of every year, and I've already gotten the trailer for this one downloaded to edit into that. So
there might be some dancing in there somewhere.
There might be some dancing. It's definitely going to rank high. Yeah, this is amazing. I loved it.
All right. Another great big love letter to this film from Will. I'll just say I loved this as well. I thought it was a really great movie, really great adaptation, for all the reasons that you guys mentioned. I guess I want to use my time a little bit, though, just to talk a little bit about the necessary piece of this film, because I'm scratching my head a little bit. Why remake West Side Story? Now, in the past, when we have heavily criticized Disney remakes of films like The Lion King and Aladdin and, you know, I'm usually the one that's like, well, you know, a remake reintroduces something for a new generation. It allows a whole new group of people to experience something, and it makes it accessible. I'm wondering for myself how this remake is meant to function. Like, is this meant to get a whole bunch of new people to come out who've never seen West Side Story before and see this and be indoctrinated to it? Or is this to get the people who loved the original movie, or maybe have been lucky enough to see it as a stage play, to come out and see this? And Jim, you kind of alluded to the box office and what's happening there. I mean, is completely bombing, right? Like, how much has it made? Like $6 million,
they said it was like 10 million and
10 million, but it cost $100 million to make this movie. Like, I don't know that this movie is going to come even close to making its budget back. And so I kind of wonder, like, how this movie got made. If it is a passion project for Steven Spielberg, did he fund a lot of this film getting made? Because I'm just scratching my head a little bit, wondering why Hollywood would kind of take the risk that they did on this film. I'm glad they did, because I'm really glad that I got to see it. I think it's phenomenal, and I think everybody who likes musicals or you know, maybe likes period pieces, I think you can't go wrong seeing this. If lots and lots of dancing and people singing isn't your thing, then obviously, you know, this isn't the film for you. But I want to ask you, Jim, and you, Will, what was the point of this, you think?
That's a tough question. And you're going to get a lot of different answers from people. I don't know what the point is. I started off my review by saying I believe it is a personal passion project of Steven Spielberg. I don't know if he had in his mind that, oh, if I make this movie, especially with the names I have in this movie, that, you know, there isn't a big star in this movie. They're just, I mean, Rita Moreno, you could argue, but even then, she's not a big star of today's film. So, like, there isn't a name draw there. So I don't know. I mean, in his mind, if he thought, oh, this is going to be huge, it's going to be a blockbuster. I think it was more like, you know, this probably isn't going to be a blockbuster, but I'm going to make this fucking thing anyway because I love it. You know, I want to give it a fresh face and be able to maybe fix is a strong word, but I want to be able to, as Will mentioned, kind of make it more culturally appropriate in terms of the representation that it had in the film. And I'm glad he did that. Yeah, I don't, you're right. The question still exists. Why did we need this? No. Am I glad we have it? Absolutely. I loved it. So plus I think what also helps me swallow this one a little bit better is that to me it's almost equal, or some would argue maybe even a little bit better than the original movie, or maybe not quite as good but really close, and it gives me those same feelings. Whereas the Lion King remake, you mentioned another one, Brad,
Aladdin. I mean,
Aladdin,
insert any
Disney
remake.
one, yeah.
Dumbo, all that stuff fell drastically short artistically for me, to the original. This to me is a proper homage, I guess, to the original, and I think that helps a little bit. But you're absolutely right, Brad. The question still remains: why was it made? I think, I don't know if there's a good answer to that.
There's a few reasons why. First of all, Spielberg's been wanting to make this for a while, right? And so Spielberg's one of those guys who I think he has enough sort of like credits cashed up that, you know, he can sort of say, I want to make this, and a studio is going to be more likely to say, yeah, let's do it. Plus, a known property versus an original property, that's usually a thing. There's been a lot of talk in the news lately just about, you know, if you think about since 2016, the last presidency, there were a lot of issues with the way we treated people of non-white skin tones. And this is a movie about those racial prejudices coming to the surface and the way that they impact people. So there's a social relevance to right now. And there's a discussion here in chat that I think is absolutely worth flagging as well. There was a similar trajectory with The Greatest Showman. Thomas flags this. It did 8.8 million its first week, and then it became a huge grosser over the course of like several weeks. It opened really limp, and then became a much stronger film in the long run. And so Spielberg's been wanting to work on this for a bit. 2017 comes around, and that's when Greatest Showman comes out, and Spielberg's sort of working on this script at this point. Pre-production was announced on this in January of 2018, right around the time Greatest Showman was picking up steam. So it's very easy to say, look, there's probably a risk with anything like this, but at least if you look at that exact garden bed at that exact time, you might think, well, we can mitigate the risk because this is what people seem to be into right now. So I think all of those things come together. And for me, I love that there's now a version that tells this particular story that is predominantly about Puerto Rican people and the racism that they face, that casts a predominantly like Latina cast. I think that's I think the biggest thing that I take away from this. Like, is this it's hard to justify any movie from a necessary perspective, but when I think about that, I think people who can now watch this film and say, actually, yeah, that is me up on that screen, and I can relate to that. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I want to mention something about Tom's comment about The Greatest Showman, and I had heard that too. And one of the things I read also that also made sense about why that had the legs, the long-term legs that we talked about in growing, was it had an original soundtrack, right? That was maybe more in line with today's music tastes, right? And there were some selections from that soundtrack that actually made it out into other airplay, right? And probably brought fans to that movie from the music in The Greatest Showman, right? I forget this, This Is Me or something like that. Was a huge hit, right? And I think that brought people in. I don't think that's going to happen here because these songs have been around for a long time, and you're hearing the same. Are the songs done really well? Yeah, I think they're. Will, you mentioned it. I think the singing and the performances here are great. Very close to the original, but still somehow felt a little fresh to me. But I don't think you're going to hear these, on the radio and playing on the 20 somethings or teens, playlists, unfortunately.
And that's absolutely true. This is essentially standards, right? Like in West Side Story, this is Broadway standards. Whereas The Greatest Showman was, and this isn't a knock against Greatest Showman, this was the style of musical that it was. It was pop hits or pop style songs that were tailored into a musical production, which is a totally valid way of doing it, but it's two different ways of going about it. So regardless of sort of like, I think the justification was there because of the success of Greatest Showman. I don't think that it's the same type of film as Greatest Showman. And plus, the other big difference is word of mouth works really, really well when you're not in the middle of a global pandemic and you're sort of thinking like, yeah, you know, I might casually go check out the movies. Now, there are still a good number of people who going to the movies is still an event they work up to. So they can't necessarily be word of mouth, especially when, let's face it, there's a Spider-Man movie coming out in the week. So people who are probably venturing out to go see a movie and may only go see one because they don't want to risk it too much. I mean, let's call it, they're probably seeing Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, I would say that's completely fair, and I worry about the legs of this movie, given that we're running into a Spider-Man weekend, and then we have Matrix 4 coming out, right? So at least for the next couple weeks, I think that's where the dollars are going to be going. And even with the word of mouth thing, I mean, I don't think I'm plugged into film Twitter and film Facebook like you guys are, but I usually kind of take stock of what films my friends are talking about in any given week as sort of a barometer of like, what is the everyday moviegoer like into right now? I haven't seen a single person talk about West Side Story in my social media feeds. Going to see the movie, their thoughts on the movie. I mean, nothing. And so whether that's because it's hard to say. These are people that I know are going out to see movies, that I know are braving out into the wilds of COVID, to see films. And so I just wonder why they're not seeing this one. And I think the barrier of it being a musical maybe could be a thing for some people.
Yeah.
That could certainly be part of it. But it's just unfortunate that this film is not getting the eyeballs I think that it should, because it's pretty damn wonderful.
Yeah. And, coming out a week before a giant, the Spider-Man blockbuster. I mean, it's going to get, yes, obviously we're going to see both of these movies, right? But I think you're going to get basically one set of eyes on this movie and another giant, much larger set of eyes on something like, a Spider-Man movie. And what's even more unfortunate, I was glad I got to see this on one of the big Limax, fake IMAX screens, at one of our theaters, which was great. Some people might say, "Oh, it's a musical. You don't need to see it on a big screen." I say kind of bullshit on that, because this was a beautiful looking film. I think it was a love letter to New York City as it was in the 50s, also, which was great. And like you said, the dance numbers, the high school gym dance number, the jets at the beginning when they come on the scene, and when you're a jet kind of stuff, was great. And I think this movie will be pushed out of the big screens, those specialty format screens, by the Spider-Man movie over the next couple of weeks, and then after that there'll be something else. So yeah, I hope this movie has legs. I hope it does well. But I'm still glad we have it, whether it does or it doesn't. This movie who knows what it's going to do awards-wise, and I'm not even sure I care. I did see some people mention it on Facebook, that like, oh my God, West Side Story is amazing. You need to go see it, which wasn't what I expected, right? From a readaptation or a remake. So right there, that got me even more excited to see something that I was already excited about, and it didn't let me down. So
everyone that I saw talking about it, and these were all like musical theater bears, which I get is very much a very specific sliver that doesn't capture what the average person on the street is looking at their social media bubble. But I have a lot of these musical theater bear friends who all came out of that theater and have been posting about run, don't walk to see this. And that's been exciting to see people who I think would fit target audience to be that engaged with it. And it is unfortunate, because I don't think it's just a normal superhero movie that's coming up. It's one that is very specifically part of the there's a lot that's been sort of like mystery spoiler bubbling up about the new Spider-Man one, right? So if this was just like a Black Widow week or like a, random, Batman versus Superman movie or something like that,
Venom
I don't
4.
know that it would have been Venom 4. I don't know that it would have necessarily been gobbled nearly as much as it did, but it's just like, this is the time that it came out. And I think that's because Spielberg's attached to it, right? Because Spielberg's attached to it. You release it in December because you want to make an awards push. And I don't know if that was the right call given the exact slate of films that is coming up. Unfortunately, Oscar films all get dropped in December, but nowadays also so too does the Christmas blockbuster, right? Like the movie that they want people like to go see in theaters with their family, and that's The Matrix, that's Spider-Man, that's whatever it happens to be. That's the Hunger Games in years past. Basically whatever Star Wars movies, whatever we've usually reviewed on our anniversary, right? And so it makes it especially hard for something like this that is not a small prestige film only playing in indie theaters. Those can get by because they have a target audience and a target venue. And it's not the big Christmas holiday. This is a, air quotes, mid-sized film that I think is the real victim in terms of like the exact timing and the film landscape right now. I don't know I don't know if that means, oh, this should have been released in January or this should have been a November release. I don't know when would have been better, but I think right now is especially a hard time for a mid-budget film.
Yeah, my thought would have been, release it on Christmas Day and then see how it does, through the first of the year against other maybe more like Oscar-y type movies instead of like a giant Spider-Man movie the following week.
Let it sit on the other side of Spider-Man is what you're saying.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, let the Spider-Man excitement die down and then hit him with this. Maybe
that's probably pretty cool. And in fact, I think that's what we go back to Greatest Showman. I want to say I watched that like on Christmas. I feel like that was a Christmas Day watch for me. I could be wrong, but
it may have been. It may have been. I want to circle around back to some of the stuff in this movie. I want to talk about the performance that really kind of knocked me on my ass was the two females, Ariana DeBose and Rachel Ziegler. I thought like totally exceeded my expectation, but the one that made me like stand up and take notice, and I actually wanted more of by the time the movie was done, was Mike Faced.
Yes.
Faced. I don't know, but he was he played.
You know what? We're writing our own rules right now. However you pronounce it is the way it goes out into the world. So
that's right. That's right. But he was, he was like the perfect riff for me. And then every time he was on screen, you could not take your eyes off that character. And I don't even think he had that much. I mean, he did have some singing stuff to do, not as much as maybe some of the other main characters, but yeah, man, I hope we get to see him in more stuff. He comes across to me as more of a theater guy that stepped into this movie, and that may or may not be true. I haven't really seen him in much of anything that I can think of, but I definitely will be looking for him. But like I said, I thought the cast here all around was really great. I like what they did with Bernardo. I thought Bernardo's character was great too, played by David Alvarez. And like I said, the new wrinkle here was the Valentina character, who played by Rita Moreno, and man, she had the most emotional scene in the movie for me.
Yeah.
Right. And that was added by Spielberg and his screenwriters, right, for this. And so that tells you that, I think he's dialed in to what made this story special, and that he was able to kind of add something that elevated the whole thing and felt like it belonged in there. It didn't feel force fit in there at all. So, great stuff.
I think Mike Faced is interesting because he fast-faced, we've heard it both ways. Faced, that's what it is. He originated the role of Connor in Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway. So tying everything full circle. But I was looking through his IMDb earlier because I was the same way. Like I think he was my standout performance, and him and the actress that played Anita. And there's a couple of smaller independent stylish films that look like that I've not seen nor really heard much about. And so they've kind of gone on my radar in terms of like, okay, next time I've got a gap in my watching schedule, which will
When is
probably be
that?
never. Yeah. But when it does happen, I've got a couple to add in there. I do really like the Rita Moreno adjustment. In 61 version, that was Doc played that role. Or that was the role of Doc, and she's now playing Doc's Puerto Rican wife. And I think it adds new context to the story. It adds a few more connection points between the sharks and her, as well as it helps contextualize a little bit of the way that we view like the other in racial sense. Like we're really good at making the exceptions. Well, not this one. This is the good one, but not those bad ones over there. And we got to see that a little bit with the way that at the beginning of this, Tony and some of the others saw the Rita Moreno character. I thought that was a smart choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved her singing in this. I think she did fantastic. She is a national treasure. I mean, Rita Moreno is just phenomenal. I know sitcoms aren't for everybody. She was on One Day at a Time, the revival of that. And I fucking loved her on that show. I'm so bummed that show is gone now, before its time. But it was just so great to see her show up again. And I mean, you guys know I go out of my way not to read things, not to find out things about movies before I see them as much as possible. So when I found out that Rita Moreno was going to be in the film, I was thinking she was just going to be a short cameo, something minimal just to say, hey, we have Rita Moreno in here. I did not realize that a new part had been written for her and she was going to be woven in so masterfully as she was. And so she is just a big, huge standout for me in this film. The physicality of her acting when she reaches out and she touches the photo of her and her husband, just the way that her fingers, the way that her fingers kind of like wobble with emotion as she's reaching out to touch it, and like the vibrato of her voice like shifts with the emotion. I'm getting misty just thinking about it again. I cried when that happened. Just so phenomenal to have her be in this film. I don't know what else we're going to get Rita Moreno in, for the rest of her career, but damn, I'm glad we got this.
Yeah. And by the way, mini plug here. I might have plugged it before, might have talked about it before when we did our Sundance. I think it was our Sundance, or was it South by Southwest? I forget. The Rita Moreno doc that we got this year, Just a Girl Who Decided to Go for It. If you haven't seen that, see it. You'll learn, of course, about Rita Moreno and her career, but you'll also learn about how Hollywood maybe didn't do always the right thing with actors, of certain ethnic backgrounds, especially female actors of certain ethnic background. It was kind of eye-opening for me. It's on Netflix, guys. Everybody's got access to Netflix, go see that doc. It's great.
Yep, absolutely agree. All right, listen. I know we're getting down to it with time. I have a burning question that I've been wanting to ask all episode. What is your favorite number from this version of West Side Story?
Cool. I think that it recontextualized, like, there's the push and pull over who had the gun and how, in a very, very compelling way on stage. I think there's a lot of really good numbers in this, but there were a lot of really good numbers in the original one. I think this one, most elevated that version, if that makes sense.
Wow. So many I can pick from. And Will, because you mentioned that, I'm going to have to go back and see the movie again at some point, because that was when I had to get up and go pee. It was right when right when they started that. I'm like, oh, I know what's coming up. I'll just go pee. And I came back kind of in the middle of it. So now I got to go back and see that part. But I really loved, I kind of like what they did with Officer Krupke in this film. It's always been kind of a different America is kind of a lighthearted kind of give and take, and I love that. I always love that number. I think I prefer though the way they did it in the original. I'll just say that to this one,
Sure.
although I still loved it. But the one I loved from this was the Officer Krupke, because they changed it, and it felt like kind of a palate cleanser in the middle of a very heavy story. To kind of get something from the perspective of the kids in this movie, the juvenile delinquents.
Yeah, Officer Krupke.
Krupp you.
So good. How about you, Brad?
When I listened to that soundtrack originally when I was a kid, I kept playing that over and over. Like, what are they saying here? Are they saying "fuck you"? Like I couldn't. Yeah,
they were original. I think they were. I don't remember the lore on this, but apparently, they originally got their rating because they were going to have it as "fuck you," and then they sort of changed it at the last minute. But like that's if you were wondering if it sounds that way, then yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. What about you, babe?
Oh man, my favorite from the original film is also my favorite from this version of the film, and that's America. Jim, you mentioned it is a more lighthearted song. It also, especially I think with this version, with the racially diverse cast that we have, thankfully in this film, the message resonates even more. But I think it's a very catchy song. I've been listening to it maybe 80 or 90 times since we saw the movie the other day. I've been putting the soundtrack on in the background while I've been doing some work, and I find myself just like, I don't know, like I'm not a super dancey person. I don't really like old style musicals where like there's such a heavy focus on the dancing. But I really like the choreography in that song. And so from the like swishing of the dresses to like the guys leaping and dancing, and they just do a lot of really cool visual stuff on screen, in addition to a very catchy but also very meaningful song. So but I mean, I could easily name 5 or 6 other songs that are just as good, if not better. Yeah. But that to me was my favorite.
Choose your poison. They're all good.
Yeah.
Tom, who's joining us on in the podcast tonight, says "A Boy Like That," which is a great song. It comes at a really high moment of tension and like emotion in the story between Anita and Maria. And I love the song. I love the power of the song, but something about it always seemed a little weird to me, even in both versions. Like, so Anita is saying, "This guy just killed your brother. Why are you in love with him?" And Maria is pushing back, saying, "You should know better." It's a hard thing. It's easy to fall on one side of that line, right? And maybe like overlook the fact that she was like intensely in love with him. It's an interesting number, I think, in that moment of the story, to have Maria pushing back on Anita after her boyfriend just killed her brother, right? So just powerful stuff, and good one, Tom. Good selection.
Definitely. As Romeo and Juliet stories go, I think this is a pretty darn good one, and the music just makes it that much stronger. So,
will it be showing up on y'all's end of year lists? Potentially. I know we've still got
potentially.
Maybe.
It could. Who knows? Could be.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Well, any final thoughts on West Side Story?
Nah. I just say, for people who, I know everyone's going to rush out and see Spider-Man probably soon, but don't sleep on this one. I would say see it on a big screen if you can. It's worth the admission.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
A trifecta of opinion. We're all aligned. All right, awesome. Well, this was a fun conversation. I'm so glad that we got to see West Side Story, and even more so that we got a chance to talk about it together. It's always a blast. In case people want to chat with us, though, between now and our Spider-Man show next week, also the 9-year anniversary of the Movie Bears podcast. Uh, I know. Where can people chat with you guys online? Jim, go.
Yes, you guys know you can find me on Facebook. I'm always up for Facebook. Send me a message there. Check out what I'm posting about, which I don't post a lot, but you can check me out there. You can also find me on Twitter, and my handle is at JJP Out West. So those are my initials, JJP Out West, on Twitter, and that's where I like to kind of tweet and send out my hot takes on movies and stuff.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, babe. Well, how about you? Where can folks reach out?
All right. Here's just the full rundown. Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Whatever Cove. You can find me as William Lindis on Facebook. Just a request first. I do reviews and lists and all sorts of things like that over at letterboxd.com. You can follow William Lindis there to find me. And if you like, I don't know, like bearish thirst trap stuff, find me on TikTok at The Movie Bear.
All right, excellent. And you can find me at iBradPro on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook as Brad Harris. I'm the one who likely has Bear Chub Chaser friends in common with you. Please just send a message first. Let me know you're from the show so I know that you are not a cleverly designed bot trying to get me to fall for a scam. Much appreciated if you would do that. Folks, we are definitely looking forward to talking all things Spider-Man next week and celebrating our 9-year anniversary. We will see you all then. In the meantime, be safe, stay sane, and be careful of the devil's lettuce, y'all.
Good night. Good night.
Goodbye.
See you later, folks.